This is Nathan Fantasy Football League Updates. Today, we will recap the Week 1 results and get you my Week 2 predictions. All that and more next. Nathan Fantasy Football League Updates, welcome back. Week 1 is in the books, so let's get you not only the recap of yesterday, but my predictions for Week 2. And boy, was it a fun week. It was, as I term, the week of the kickers. Kickers made all the difference this week, whether it was good or bad, and we're going to find out why in here in a minute, but boy, I have never seen some dominance by the kicking position and such little assistance by 95% of the tight end position. Boy, we're going to get all to that and more, and let's get right into it. With our first matchup, we're going to start where we ended last time with the Rocky River Rough Riders and the Guantanamo Bay Flying Squirrels. It was a fun matchup, honestly, lived up to the hype, and before we get into the results, I would like to say this week, my predictions, I was 3-2. So, more positive than negative. I got most games right, but we shoot for 5-0 every week. So week 2, expect a 5-0 pick. But let's get into the recap. And it was a upset alert. That's right. The Rocky River Rough Riders upset the Guantanamo Bay Flying Squirrels 134-131. Truly a phenomenal matchup. And really, the things I'd like to highlight from this matchup is the QB dominance from the Rocky River Rough Riders. Anthony Richardson clocked 26 fantasy points. Josh Allen, 31. That's a scary quarterback duo moving forward. They are going to be a problem. The other thing to note with the Rocky River Rough Riders, Devontae Smith, 15, Jamar Chase, 12. But outside of that, Jake Ferguson, Drake London, the rest of those flex and running back positions didn't quite leave in support. So if the quarterbacks are doing great, he needs support from the flex and below. So we'll see how the Rocky River Rough Riders fare moving forward. But once again, you love the quarterback dominancy. The other positions need to kind of pick up the slack. For the Guantanamo Bay Flying Squirrels, quarterback play was awful. Caleb Williams and Joe Burrow scored 8 or less. Alvin Kamara was really one of the only bright spots at the running back position with 22. And then Stephon Diggs and Tyreek Hill carried their weight with 26 and 21 respectively. The Saints defense also chipped in 16. But besides that, not really much to note. So that takes us from matchup number 1. A big win for the Rocky River Rough Riders, upsetting the Guantanamo Bay Flying Squirrels. On the other side of things, the Bay City Bunnies took on the Zestmeisters in what I deemed a pretty fair and fun matchup. Well, wasn't even close due to a specific man we'll get into in a minute, but 148-105 victory for the Bay City Bunnies. And looking at the final statistics for that one real quick, CJ Stroud, 18 fantasy points, 22 from A.J. Brown, and 11 from the Seahawks defense. And our first kicker, Kami Fairbairn, 17 fantasy points at the kicking position, helped the Bunnies prevail over the Zestmeisters, who granted had Lamar go for 25, Kenneth Walker 18, 17 from Nico Collins, and George Pickens made an honest 13. But Chris Olave was the real problem, 3.1, and then the number 1 overall pick, Christian McCaffrey, didn't play. He's got ACL tendonitis, which takes about a month to heal, so we're going to find out how long he's out, but on Monday Night Football, kind of spoiled the chances for the Zestmeisters. The bench, though, left out Jaden Reed with 33 fantasy points. We'll see if Jaden Reed slides in this week for the Zestmeisters after such a stellar performance. I should mention Tony Pollard on the other side for the Bunnies was a miss, and he sat on the bench. We'll see if either of those get in for the following week. Then we go to our third matchup. This one, by far, was the best matchup of the bunch. The Ithaca Iguanas took on the Empire Strikes Back, and this one came down to Monday Night Football and it was the reason we deem this Kickers Week, because the Iguanas came back in Monday Night Football to defeat the Empire 134-125. We'll start with the Empire before we really explain some things. Baker Mayfield showed out and got you 29 fantasy points. That's awesome. If he can do a fraction of that moving forward, that's a steal for your quarterback one position because you waited on quarterbacks. Then we got the top scorer of the week in Saquon Barkley in his Eagles debut. 33 fantasy points, which led everybody. So the question becomes, well, you have a top scoring quarterback and a top scoring running back. What went wrong? You even had Jay Jettis scored 15. Well, Puka Nacua got hurt. Dalton Kincaid got 2.1, and he got -1 from the Jets defense. Nobody else really scored over 10 except Etienne, Jefferson, and Goff. So a lot of problems there for the Empire that they've got to get straightened out moving forward. But the heartbreaking loss, Jalen Hurts scored 16 for the Iguanas, 19 for James Conner, which was awesome. CD disappointing with 13, and Amon-Ra disappointing with 4. That's your number 2 and number 5 overall pick. But the thing that did it for the Iguanas in Monday Night Football, 26 fantasy points for Jake Moody. Jake Moody went off and stormed the Iguanas back for the win. What a walk-off winner from Jake Moody. Just a stunner for the Empire, who thought they had it in the bag. So, kicking and special teams, so important in fantasy football. And that brings us to our final two matchups. In my opinion, kind of a surprising result between the fourth matchup, the Groundhogs and the Bandicoots. It was a dominating rout for the Grand Rapids Groundhogs, 150-124. Looking at the numbers for the Bandicoots, Jordan Love, 16 fantasy points, but we all know he's going to miss 3 to 6 weeks with a leg injury. So that's going to be a problem moving forward for the big brain Bandicoots. But as injuries strive, we like to call them the big brain Band-Aids, because we're stuck on Band-Aid brand and they are always getting injured. So Kyler Murray didn't really assist the quarterback position with 14. Bijan Robinson and Kyron Williams were serviceable, 16 and 14 respectfully. Devontae Adams was horrible at 10, and Malik Neighbors was slightly better, but still terrible with 11 because Daniel Jones was throwing him the football. Moving down the board, Evan Ingram got you 1, and Joe Mixon was the highlight, though, with 26 fantasy points. So at least you have that moving forward. Any big misses on the bench was 20 from Xavier Worthy for the Bandicoots and 17 for Geno Smith. But Geno Smith obviously going to slide up with the injury to Jordan Love. So we'll see how the next week pans out for the Bandicoots after a disappointing loss. But everything seemed to go right for the young, studded team of the Grand Rapids Groundhogs. Jaden Daniels led the way with 28 fantasy points. Tua posted 18, and Devon Achane posted 23. And then the wide receiver position was really the problem. It was Marvin Harrison and Michael Pittman, 1.4 for Marv and 7.1 for Michael. And then the big stars, though, Cooper Kupp, 32 fantasy points. He had a game, and I expect him to have better games moving forward now that Puka's hurt. Alongside him, Cairo Santos, another big kicker, getting you 13 fantasy points, helping you clock 150. The big misses off the bench would technically be Ramondre Stevenson at 21, but that's just more points for you. Wouldn't have missed much. But again, a huge rout for the Grand Rapids Groundhogs, 150-124. And that brings us to our game of the week. It was the Cave Shrimp and Avengers. And the Avengers took care of business pretty handily. It was 155-126, a disappointing first outing all the way around for the Cave Shrimp. I mean, you look at things, Brock Purdy and Dak Prescott, 11 and 10. Very disappointing from the quarterback room. Isaiah Pacheco is the leader in that studded running back room with 15. Jacobs with 12. Taylor with 10. That's not what you're looking for from a studded running back room. So hopefully moving forward, just because of some poor matchups, hopefully these guys step it up. I mean, Trey McBride, 8 fantasy points. The only player that scored above 15, Isaiah Pacheco and Deebo Samuel, who got me 18. Other than that, Jake Elliott, 10, and Steelers defense, 13. Off the bench, the only miss was Jamison Williams with 24 fantasy points. So maybe we'll see JMO this week for the Bowling Green Cave Shrimp. On the other side of things for the Michigan Avengers, the quarterback play was fine. Patrick Mahomes got you 15. Justin Herbert got you 10. 18 from Breece Hall and 17 from Jahmyr Gibbs was the big spotlight, along with Mike Evans' impressive 23-point game. The big concern, though, relies with Mark Andrews, who might be tight end 2 now, and Baltimore? We'll find out. There are only 3 fantasy points for Mark Andrews. Isaiah Likely was the guy, but the other problem, which can be very rage-inducing as the manager of the Cave Shrimp, Cowboys defense 19 fantasy points, Brandon Aubrey 21. So a very annoying loss off the back of a defense and a special team. But that's how it goes sometimes in fantasy. And a big win for the regular season and reigning champs in the Michigan Avengers. Big misses would be Chris Godwin with 22 and Derek Carr with 21. But that rounds up our recap of week 1. We've got some surprising teams making big leeways and some teams who had some disappointing week 1s and the Empire who sadly got upset, or crazily I should say. But that is your recap. Now, it is time for the week 2 predictions, and it is going to be a big week for a lot of teams. You can either take a step forward to go 2-0, you can take a step backwards and fall to 1-1, or take a big step backwards and go to 0-2. A lot of things can happen this week, but there's going to be a big spot for a lot of teams to either get off to a good start or not get off to a good start. So, some good matchups, but we'll get right into it. We're going to start with the first matchup. The Bowling Green Cave Shrimp take on the Grand Rapids Groundhogs in what should be a very exciting matchup. I think this, a young squad with the Groundhogs, a lot of younger guys that have the opportunity for big fantasy points. On the other side, a lot of, a good mix for the Cave Shrimp. We'll start with the Cave Shrimp, who fall 0-1 to the 1-0 Groundhogs. So, for the Cave Shrimp, I think this is a lot different of a week. We finally get to see this team shine, in my opinion, because I think last week, my players played tough matchups, tough teams that really hindered their ability to shine, and they all underperformed because they're playing tough teams. Whereas this week, I feel like all the matchups favor my players. You look at the quarterback room. The Cowboys play the Saints. Brock Purdy and the the 49ers play the Minnesota Vikings. Both, I think, can dominate their matchup, and I think they both have exceptional weeks compared to what they did last time. My running backs, Jonathan Taylor and Josh Jacobs, both play each other. Colts versus Packers. I think Josh Jacobs, as my turning point player, does an exceptional job bouncing back. Obviously, it was a shaky start in week 1 because he did salvage it near the fourth quarter, but didn't get in the end zone, which was the difference between a fine outing for Josh Jacobs and a great outing as a fantasy value. So I think those running backs take a step up. Garrett Wilson will dominate the Tennessee Titans, and I think outside of that, everybody else will play just around average. But overall, I'm expecting Josh Jacobs, Jonathan Taylor, my quarterbacks, to take the next step to really help round this Cave Shrimp team out. On the other side of things are the Grand Rapids Groundhogs. Some decent matchups. Jaden Daniels gets to take on the New York Giants. Because of that, I think he goes 20+. Again, we saw what he did against the Buccaneers. He's great on the ground. He's got a solid arm. Jaden Daniels has a phenomenal week 2 against the Giants. And he definitely was in the range for player of the week this week. I don't think he gets there, but really close. On the other side of things, I think, if Devon Achane plays, I don't know if he's going to be 100%. They've had some injury issues in the Dolphins running back room, so I think he might have a down game. I would like to highlight, though, Cooper Kupp. No Puka Nacua for a couple weeks. He's going to be back to that really incredible form. I expect a 20+ week from Cooper Kupp. And then Kelsey disappoints again, and your turning point player, Marvin Harrison Jr., gets the rock more. Obviously, 1 fantasy point, 1 catch, not great. He obviously will exceed that here in week 2, but I think it's a 12, 13-point game for the Grand Rapids Groundhogs. But I'm going to, looking at this matchup, I think both teams have some solid matchups. But as I mentioned, I think there's some more solid matchups for the Bowling Green Cave Shrimp. So in a 1-point spread, give me the Bowling Green Cave Shrimp to rebound here in week 2 and improve to 1-1, while the Grand Rapids Groundhogs fall to 1-1. I think the matchups just favor the Cave Shrimp a little bit more, and I'm worried about the health of Devon Achane, and I'm worried about Kelsey and Harrison Jr. as your turning point player really finding their groove early on in the season. So matchup 1 out the window. Here comes matchup 2. It's the Bunnies taking on the Empire Strikes Back. One of these teams in the Bunnies had a dominant week 1 win over the Zestmeisters, while the Empire had a heartbreaking loss to the Iguanas and fall to 0-1. Well, Some big opportunities for the Bunnies already to exceed expectations and for the Empire to really miss expectations. This is the number 9 team in my preseason poll compared to the number 3 team. And I think this is a fun matchup in store. I think we'll look first at the Bunnies. CJ Stroud has a good week. Stafford and Henry, I think, do play honestly fine. Henry better than last week. And I think A.J. Brown has a bounce back, or not a bounce back, but another quality start. We look at your turning point player. It's a new addition to the lineup. It's Tony Pollard. Tony Pollard obviously scored 18 last week for the Titans against the Bears. He seems to be the guy in Tennessee. They know how to run the football. I think Tony Pollard, as your turning point player, has another strong week. On the flip side of things, we look at the Empire, and a little bit of injury bug has hit them, but I think Baker Mayfield and Jared Goff, obviously their quarterbacks played each other. Solid back and forth between them, but I think Baker Mayfield, of course, has a better week 2. Not as good as his week 1. He dropped 29 in week 1, but a serviceable and solid week 2. Then we get to Saquon Barkley. I think Saquon Barkley continues to dominate in the Eagles uniform. Another 20-plus performance. Saquon Barkley is back, and the Empire will love it. Justin Jefferson squares off against the 49ers. I think he's going to obviously have a down week. 49ers defense is incredible. I think they struggle to get him the rock. Then we get to your turning point player. It's Rashee Rice filling in for Puka Nacua. Obviously had a great week 1. He didn't even get in the end zone and had a great week 1 for the Chiefs. I think he has another serviceable, solid week 2 for the Chiefs. So I like the turning point player. Good sub for Puka Nacua. Looking down the board, other things I'd like to point out. Robinson Jr. from the Commanders slides in at your flex position. Don't mind that, as he had a good week 1. They play the Giants. Expect a good week 2. Dalton Kincaid was terrible in week 1. I expect him to be more of the same against the Dolphins. I just don't know why he was so bad in week 1. So that brings us to our predictions. And in a 6-point spread, give me the Bay City Bunnies to upset the Empire Strikes Back. Looking at this matchup, I think the statistics down the board, Kincaid, Robinson, even ETN and the quarterback play, it's going to be rough for the Empire Strikes Back this week, whereas the Bunnies, I like more of their matchups. I like A.J. Brown, Matt Stafford, C.J. Stroud, Tony Pollard, and Sam Laporta to have big weeks for the Bunnies to improve them to 2-0, and the Empire, shockingly, to fall to 0-2. Now we go to matchup 3. It's the Iguanas taking on the Flying Squirrels. The Iguanas, of course, the comeback kids, they win it in week 1, and they're 1-0. The Flying Squirrels get upset by the Rocky River Rough Riders and fall to 0-1. This matchup, I don't think, is relatively close, unfortunately. I think there are some circumstances for some teams and players, but let's see if you can decipher. Jalen Hurts plays the Atlanta Falcons this week. I think he has a big week for the Eagles. On the other side of things, your turning point player, Malik Willis, the new starting quarterback for the Green Bay Packers. He's your turning point player. I don't see him having a big week. I think he's going to want to run the football. He has yet to throw an NFL career touchdown. I think he's going to struggle. I think that's going to hurt your fantasy team this week. But I do think your running back tandem, Connor and Ford, play well. And then we get to the top scorer of the week. It's CeeDee Lamb. Obviously a disappointing week 1 for him against the Cleveland Browns. He still played serviceable, but not up to that number 2 pick standard. But I think week 2 against the Saints, he blows it out of the water. I'm talking high 20s, 30-point game. This is a guy that Dak Prescott's going to want to get the football to keep him happy. And then alongside of him, Amon-Ra St. Brown, who also had a terrible game. He had 3 fantasy points in week 1. The Lions and Dan Campbell make a point to get him the football. He dominates the Buccaneers in week 2. So that wide receiving core becomes scary. On the other side for the Flying Squirrels, another dangerous receiving core. Tyreek Hill, Stephon Diggs. Diggs in his debut with the Texans looked excellent. They were getting him the football in the red zone, getting him the football in general. And Tyreek Hill, we know what happened with Tyreek Hill. He's going to dominate even more because allegedly the individual who was involved with that incident was a Bills fan. I think he dominates the Bills in revenge. I think Hill and Diggs have monster weeks. All 4 wide receivers in this matchup are incredibly good. I think Alvin Kamara has a good week. You finally start Aaron Rodgers. I like that matchup. Joe Burrow, I think, continues to struggle off the gates as the Bengals travel to Kansas City. Your turning point player of the week becomes your running back 2, still Zamir White. I do not trust Zamir White by any means. I think he has a down week. But if he performs well, that could be the difference in this one. But once again, not a huge fan of Zamir White. That brings me to my predictions. Iguanas, flying squirrels. Give me the Iguanas in a 10-plus point spread to improve to 2-0 on the season in dominant fashion over the flying squirrels. 4th matchup. This one, we're going to go over it a little bit as Avengers take on the Zestmeisters. 0-1 for the Zestmeisters, 1-0 for the Avengers. We'll start with the Zestmeisters. They start Lamar. Lamar, I think, is going to have another great game against the Raiders. I think he's going to rush well. He's going to throw well. Another all-round performance from your quarterback 1. On the other side of things, you're going to probably have to start with no CMC this week. You're going to have to start Mason, and we saw what he did in week 1. I'm going to stamp him against the Vikings again to do it in week 2 to have another solid performance. And then we get to your turning point player. It's Chris Olave. He didn't get involved at all for the Saints against the Panthers of all teams. How are we supposed to expect him to get involved versus the Cowboys in week 2? We're going to find out. The Saints need to get him the ball. He's their best receiver, and then Rashid Shaheed has the speed we know. But you got to get the ball in Olave's hands. I think he has a 13, 14-point game, but as your turning point player, I still don't know what to think of him after the week 1 performance against the Carolina Panthers. Other notable stat I'd like to point out, George Pickens, I think, has a great game against the Denver Broncos. On the other side, Michigan Avengers, I think your quarterbacks really step it up. Patrick Mahomes returns to form. Justin Herbert against the Carolina Panthers finds success. Docket, Quentin Johnston gets into the end zone for Justin Herbert. On the other side of things, running back room, Breece Hall, Jahmyr Gibbs, excellent. Your turning point player, it's Mark Andrews. Is he the starter? We don't know. I need to find this out, but you're going to risk it again. He's your turning point player. Obviously, we know the Ravens are trying to slowly get him back involved, but what does that mean? We're going to have to find out. But that's your turning point player in Mark Andrews, and that brings me to my predictions. And in another 10-plus point spread, I'm taking the Michigan Avengers to improve to 2-0, while the Zestmeisters fall to 0-2. So that brings us to our final matchup of the week, and it's the game of the week. And if you've done the math, you know it's the Rocky River Roughriders taking on the Brisbane Bay Bandicoots. I accidentally called them the Big Brain Bandicoots earlier. Not anymore. I'm trying to remember it. But game of the week, Roughriders, Bandicoots. Should be a fun one. I'm excited for this matchup. You've got obviously the Roughriders who upset the Flying Squirrels in week 1, and the Bandicoots who were stunned by the Groundhogs in dominant fashion in week 1 as well. So what has to change here? And looking at the Bandicoot squad, I think both their running backs have excellent weeks. Bijan against the Eagles and Kyron Williams against the Cardinals. Find the end zone and find some solid running room. Then quarterbacks, obviously no Jordan Love, Band-Aid brand moment, but I think Geno Smith, they play the Patriots. Lucky for you. I think he has another great game. They played the Broncos and the Patriots back-to-back weeks. And then Kyler Murray suffices more than 14 points this time. I think he's looking at that 16, 17 range. Good rushing yards, and he finds the end zone. Then we get to your receivers. Devontae Adams is playing the Baltimore Ravens. I think he struggles again. And this becomes the constant problem. Your turning point player, we're going back to Malik Neighbors. And because Daniel Jones is throwing him the football, we saw what happened last time. People are already speculating Malik Neighbors wants out of New York because of how bad Daniel Jones is. But that's your turning point player. And then another notable thing, Joe Mixon, I think has a dominant game this week against the Chicago Bears. They really like running him the ball or giving him the ball to run, and they like to get him the ball out of the backfield. Another thing to note, they did get Isaiah Likely. It is a toss-up game time decision whether Evan Ingram or Likely will start. I think they're looking at similar scores. I think Likely doesn't do what he did last week, especially because I think Mark Andrews will get more involved, but still something to monitor moving forward. On the other side of things, the Rough Riders, the quarterback tandem of Anthony Richardson and Josh Allen dominate. I'm talking 25 plus for Josh Allen. I'm talking around the 20 range for Anthony Richardson. Really one of the best quarterback duos in the league. They are going to be unstoppable this year, really. And then on the other side of things, Jamar Chase always finds a way to dominate against the Chiefs. I think he does it again. And then your turning point player, Drake London. He got, I think it was 2 or 3 fantasy points in week 1. What does he do in week 2 now against the Philadelphia Eagles? I don't think much at all. Again, I think once again, Drake London. Why do we keep overhyping this guy? He never lives up to the hype. I think he struggles this week. And because of that, in a 2-point spread in the game of the week, give me the Brisbane Bay Bandicoots to bounce back and improve to 1-1, while the Rocky River Rough Riders fall in a close one in the game of the week to 1-1. So that takes us through not only my week 1 recap, but our week 2 predictions. Once again, Cave Shrimp defeat the Groundhogs, Bunnies take down the Empire, the Bandicoots in the game of the week take down the Rough Riders, Iguanas take down the Flying Squirrels in convincing fashion, and then the Avengers dominate the Zestmeisters, all now in week 2. So thank you for watching, and we'll see you again real soon. Thanks for watching the Nathan Fantasy Football League Sports Talks channel, and have a good one. Good luck this week to all of our teams.